You're listening to the We Chose Play podcast from Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting development through playful interactions. All right, welcome to Affect Autism, and this week we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Ira Glovinsky in West Bloomfield, Michigan, where he has a practice that is based on the DIR model, and Dr. Glovinsky is a psychologist, and he's also an expert training leader for DIR floor time, and he also coordinates the Fielding University PhD program in which people take their doctorate and do research in infant and mental health, largely around the DIR model. And Dr. Glovinsky can elaborate on that introduction in case any of it was a little bit off. Welcome, Dr. Glovinsky.
Thank you, Terry. I'm a co-lead in the fielding program. We have three of us who share that load. I was initially a co-leader with another person, but the program has really blossomed. So we have another person and we share the load.
Great. Actually, even though we weren't going to focus on this for the podcast, would you say a word or two about this Fielding University program?
Yeah, the Fielding program actually was, before it was called the Fielding program, it was the ICDL doctoral program. The program was started by Stanley Greenspan in 2007. A number of people collaborated to get the program going. And initially, it was a freestanding program, which meant that it wasn't affiliated with any university. And we were much too small to really get accreditation from any university accrediting organization. The model of the program is exactly what goes along with DIR. It was really Stanley Greenspan's model that became the DIR model. He was the founder. As our students moved into the dissertation track, we really wanted our students to graduate from an accredited university. So we began to go out on a shopping spree to look for universities that seemed to have similar kinds of philosophies, frameworks. And in 2014, we merged with Fielding University. And the program is really, right now, it's the only doctoral program in the world that awards a degree in infant and early childhood development that emphasizes mental health and developmental disabilities. The program, again, is comprised of professionals from different disciplines. A number of the people on the faculty are really people who originally worked with Dr. Greenspan in the ICDL organization.
Great. And ICDL is Interdisciplinary Council on Development and Learning, which was an organization started with Dr. Greenspan.
And it started with Dr. Greenspan, Dr. Serena Weeder, and then a number of other people who were either in the background or the foreground who helped organize it.
Right. And it is currently the home of DIR Floor Time. They offer DIR Floor Time training to professionals, and that's great. And what I wanted to focus on today was a bit about DIR in general, and the last few posts on the blog have really been more of an introduction to the overall concept of DIR and the philosophy to the approach and to the intervention that is floor time. And so I thought you would be a great person to ask about this because you have recently posted some nice blogs, some nice videos on your Facebook site specifically about a problem that's been happening that you've seen with your clients and that you've heard teachers talk about in schools and parents, that children are really overreactive and parents are having a hard time controlling behavior. Teachers are seeing behavioral outbursts, and you really come at the issue with a remedy that is very different than a lot of mainstream solutions out there, which are very behaviorally based. And it speaks to what the DIR model really is all about, a developmental approach, which looks at the child's development as opposed to specific behaviors. So I guess, I don't know which way is the best way to go at it. Do you want to talk about some of the issues that you mentioned in your Facebook post and how the model works at it, or would you like to start with a general overview of the approach and its uniqueness and differences?
What I'll do, I think, is I will just sort of free associate to your comments. The model is really an individual difference-based model. And one of the things that we don't pay enough attention to is the fact that kids come into the world with a biology. They come into the world with different thresholds for sensory input, emotional input, and what happens is, I think the way parents' experiences and teachers, educators' experiences are looking at what's in front of you. And what's in front of all of us is the behavior of the other person. And what I have found, really in my experience, is I tend to work with children who have real severe emotion dysregulation. That's my background. And the severe emotion dysregulation is really physiologically based. So what I think is that when we look at the behavior in front of us and we make corrections, we make interventions, what we're really doing is we're, I think, dealing with splinters, so that if one behavior is dealt with, one behavior is dealt with, and something else is going to pop up, and something else is going to pop up. And the question is, where does it come from? And where the neuroscience is taking us and the physiological research is taking us is it really starts with our bodies. And it really starts with our biological sensitivities, our biological reactivities, things as subtle as the size of different structures in the brain that are related to emotionality and the circuits that tie in lower brain functioning, emotional system with upper brain functioning cognition. And when you begin to work with children on the level of where it's coming from, the underpinnings of the behavior, what you're not dealing with is you're not dealing with splinters, you're dealing with the foundation of what's causing these behaviors. And like I said in the first video, when you see a child who is acting out all over the place, what you're really seeing is a heart rate that's increasing. You're seeing blood pressure increasing. You're seeing a child's breathing become much more shallow, and you're seeing changes in the physiological system. So what do you do about it? You can try to deal with the behaviors, but typically these behaviors activate adults. And so the child's activation meets the parent's activation or the teacher's activation, and you have, a dance that's not a very pleasant dance for anybody. Or what you can do is you can begin to work on calming the physiology. When the physiology is activated, the control system in the brain is working less efficiently. By working on the physiology and calming the system, what you're doing is you're opening the window for that control center in the front part of the brain to do its job. And so what the model does really is it focuses on those individual differences at the level that the child is functioning, so that what you're not doing is working over where the child is capable of responding. And the entire foundation is the relationship between the two people who are working in the moment. What a lot of research shows at this point in time is that there are countless interventions. They're being developed and introduced every day. But really, the linchpin, if you want to call it, of any of these interventions are the two people who are working together. And that relationship is really one of the foundations of this DIR model.
Right. And I think, I have a couple of different comments. One thing I heard on the news yesterday in Toronto was that there's been an inquest into some police shootings here of mentally ill people, and the person died. So they've been interviewing, they were interviewing someone who works at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is a big mental health facility in Toronto. And the woman might as well have been saying what you were saying, because she said, what we see is that the police aren't trained in the way to deal with mental health. And what they see is, all they can see is the behavior that's in front of them. So this man happened to pick up a big fence post, a metal fence post, and it's a threatening object coming at you. And you immediately go into defense mode, and you bring that stress level up, which only stresses the stressed person out even more. And she was suggesting that they be trained in de-escalation, which we would call co-regulation, which is what you were just talking about in the DIR model, which, in case we haven't said yet, is the developmental, individual differences, relationship-based model. And she said, instead, the police might say, is there anything I can do? How can I help you? And just right away putting that threat down can make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was so interesting that this was being talked about on the mainstream, and this is what teachers and parents can do with children every day.
Mm-hmm. In a stress occupation, whether it's law enforcement or these days education, people go into a situation with their systems activated. One of the things that you see is sort of the readiness for some sort of negative event often. So you move into the situation with high reactivity to begin with, and that part of your brain, the amygdala, reacts milliseconds before the cortical system. So what happens is if you don't have control over the system, These situations activate you, and because there's no time for thought, it's translated into action immediately, and that's where we run into trouble. We're unable to give ourselves the opportunity to let that sensory input move from that emotional system out to emotional system up to the cognitive system, so that I can say, ooh, we have a problem here. What can I do to help you?
Right. And with parents, they sometimes get themselves in a pickle because you want to hurl threats at your child. If you don't stop that right now, I'm going to do this, or you can't do this. And then the child might not be able to control the behavior. So then you have to escalate the threat, and it becomes this, you get yourself into quite a pickle.
Exactly. Yeah. It's taking away one thing after another until there's nothing left. And you're left with an angry, misunderstood child. And that's a huge problem. That's just a very huge problem.
And unfortunately, a lot of the times, the child isn't necessarily being malicious or defiant. They're just being children who are developmentally at a stage where they might not be able to control certain impulses, and the parents might be punishing that unknowingly.
And that has to be underlined in red, put in italics, and really go out there, because I think one of the things that lots of adults have difficulty seeing or understanding is that adults and children don't live on the same planet. The adult world is very different than the child world. And we really, and again, this is part of the DIR model, we really have to get into the child's world and follow that child's lead. One of the things, Daria, that I do with all of my parents, where I'm going to work on the model, I tend to work with the young kids because I'm really fascinated by the emergence of mood instability and mood disorders in kids. So what I will say to the parent is, this is the deal. You've been commissioned by NASA, and you are going to Planet Jimmy. I'll use the child's name. And we have a major, major problem. The major problem is that the creatures on Planet Jimmy have never seen an earthling. No matter what you do, they're not going to understand it, because they're not going to be able to, they don't have the template to understand it. So what you're going to have to do is you have to observe for a little while, and you're going to have to enter that child's world, or that creature's world in this case. And so what happens pretty much 100% of the time is, after the first 10 seconds or so, I'll go, whoops, that's an earthling thing. And parent will just look up, and they'll go back to playing. And about 5 seconds, they'll go, oops, that's an earthling thing. and about after the 4th or 5th time that I say that they're doing an earthling thing, either they're going to pick themselves up and take themselves out of the office thinking that I'm, this crazy person who they're working with and they don't understand, or what they will do is they will say, so what do I do? And my response is, I can't tell you what to do, but you can't be an earthling. And something will happen all the time. And it can be something like the child's hand pounding on the floor or something like that. And the parent will imitate it. and the child will look at the parent, and the parent will do it again, and the child will imitate it, and usually with some sort of vocalization to go along with it. And the parent will imitate the vocalization, and then they're into the interaction. So what the parent has to do, or the teacher has to do, is really redefine their understanding of play, because their understanding of play is, do you want to play with the soldiers? Do you want to play with the blocks? That's not play. What play is to a child can be anything. They can, like I said, just knock on a table. They can, sprawl themselves out on the floor. And that's the play. That's the engagement. That's the relationship. I had a father who had a child on the autism spectrum, and he came into the office and he said, I don't know what to do. I've, gone through my bag of tricks and I am totally lost. What do I do? And my response was, I don't know what we do. Let's take a look. And the child at that point got up on a chair that was, that was in the office. And I said, there it is. There's the game. And the father looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, this is the chair game. And for the next 45 minutes, it was a full session, this father and this child engaged in a chair game, under the chair, over the chair, standing on the chair, moving the chair. And they just were entrained with each other. And, the father said to me, I would have never have thought that a chair could be, the tool for an interaction for 45 minutes. Look at how many different things we did with this chair. And my response was that it wasn't only the chair was the vehicle for your interaction with your child. It was the engagement that was the important piece.
The children always want to engage in play, even if they can't show it. And it's our responsibility to find out how to get into that world they're in and get that interaction out by being playful. It's like, how parents say the children will play with the big box that the toy came in more than they play with the expensive toy. It's a perfect example what you just gave with the chair.
Exactly. Yeah. But as we develop, as we grow up, we get pulled into rules and regulations. So play is defined in a different way, and you really have to change.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's the hurdle that a lot of parents who get a new diagnosis, if their child is on the spectrum, have a hard time understanding that they can make the most difference. They're told to get right into therapy as soon as possible. What can I do to help my child? What can I do to cure my child? What can I do to make sure they're going to function in society? And there is no direct answer for that. There is no cure. There is no one fits all solution. It really is about promoting the natural development of the child and bringing out that child's highest potential. And you can't do that unless you get to know the child.
Exactly. Yeah, and there are a couple of other pieces to this. One piece of it, and again, it gets back to the model, is what Dr. Greenspan was interested in doing was melding models. His initial work was in taking a look at learning theory, behavioral theory, and meshing it with psychoanalytic theory. Then he went on to link Piaget's cognitive theory with psychoanalytic theory. And his idea about merging led to looking at children in a holistic way. So one of the things that DIR does is it looks at the child as a whole system, and you're dealing with all parts of the system. If you just focus on behavior, you're focusing on, one part of the system, and it can be valuable. It can be very valuable, but it doesn't address the entire child. Another thing is that what we get into, like you say, are getting a diagnosis. And one of the things that I think about, and I think we're moving in this direction, is that categorical diagnoses put people in boxes. And 2 people or 10 people can get the same diagnosis and have 10 different behavior patterns. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we cluster people into a box, into a category, give it a name, and then present it to the parents. The parents don't have a clue. All they have is this label, versus the idea of when we evaluate children, we're really evaluating strengths and weaknesses. And it doesn't matter what the label is, necessarily, as much as what do we need to address? And what are this child's strengths that we can use to bolster the weaknesses, and how do we work on what the child, needs help with in terms of weaknesses? And let's look at the family system. Let's look at that relationship together. And we're going through a paradigm shift in training, because what people are saying is that the training is really like the 5 blind men or 6 blind men and the elephant. You touch a part of the elephant and you get a picture of what you think the whole should look like, and it doesn't look like that at all. And so what we need to do in training is we need to meld all of these disciplines and train professionals to be able to look at the big picture rather than, something that I call a splinter.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you talk about, I was wondering if you could give an example of what you talked about in terms of looking at the whole child, finding their strengths, and using those strengths to bring up their weaknesses. Can you give an example of what you mean by that for the parents listening?
Let's see. I think that you can have a child who has a real strength in, motor planning, motor output, fine motor, gross motor, and is weak in language expression. And so, boy, I know that this kid loves to move around and get engaged in physical activities. And as we engage in those physical activities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put sounds and words along with it so that when the child does something, I'm going to give a voice to that something so the child can imitate my language. Now we're combining motor with language. But along with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little dramatic with my emotions. And so now we're pairing motor functioning with language functioning with emotionality. And you can just, expand. That's like throwing a rock in a pond and watching the ripples go out further and further and further. You can do the same thing in intervention.
Right, and by making the experience emotionally pleasurable for the child around the activity that the child enjoys, they're going to be more likely to learn and remember and use that language again in the future.
But, there's a but there. And the but is that what you can also do is you can utilize negative experiences in the same way to expand the child. So an example of that is I have a little boy who loves to play with trains. And so he gets the train on the track, and the train is going around the track. And somehow, I don't know how it happens, but somehow my elbow gets stuck on the track. And now this child is a little irritated with me and begins to push my arm or something. And what I'm doing is I'm playing, I don't know what's going on. And so what you're going to do, or what I'm doing in that situation, is I'm presenting an obstruction and that child is presenting irritation and annoyance. And I'm thinking about what I don't want to do is I don't want to precipitate a tantrum. So I'm thinking about the child's threshold, but I'm playing like I don't know. And at some point, the child will do something or might say, off, and I'll go, oh, you wanted me to take my elbow off the track. And child, oh, not, yeah. And so I take my elbow off the track, and somehow my ankle on my other foot ends up on the track. And so we can have these little negative interactions that are really productive and learning experiences without the child getting out of control. It can be very playful.
Right. And at first I thought you were going to go somewhere else. And I actually want to ask you about that somewhere else, because that's something that happens with our son, which is an emotionally charged fun. I don't want to say it's negative. In the earthling adult world, it might be negative, but in the child world, it's playful and fun, is that, our son might do some kind of fun thing where the trains all crash and fall, or maybe hit somebody on the head and they say, ow, and that emotional response was so exciting that I want to do it again and again. And that's not really appropriate. So how do we sort of tame that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you have to be creative, and I think you really have to allow yourself, it's hard to say, it's allowing yourself a kind of freedom where what you do is you make a subtle shift. So it might be that child throws the car at me. And what I might do is, and this is just thinking in the moment, is I might get a little bin and I might put the bin down and I'll pick up a car and I'll throw it in the box. And now what we've done is we've shifted away from that kind of excitement into, something else playfully. But it's really, the deal is if a child throws a car at an adult, the impulse is to say, no, stop.
Yes.
Rather than, oh, the child just threw a car at me. I wonder what that means. And I have to think of something to keep the child engaged, but shift the child away. He doesn't have it out for me. He's not throwing it at me in a negative way, like you say. So let me see if I can understand that behavior and channel it into something else.
And I'm pretty sure that's the hardest challenge for parents. Our son is going through a phase right now where it's super fun to hit or kick just for fun, to get that ow reaction out of friends and out of parents, and also coming up and licking my arm, licking my cheek, licking this, and just saying, ew, gross, and laughing and thinking it's so fun. And he's so playful and innocent and so cute, but at the same time, he's doing this over and over and over again. He can't get enough. And I know in Engaging Autism, the book by Dr. Greenspan and Weider, they say, giving a lot of floor time sessions a day, getting that child to get a lot of emotional feedback in a constructive way so they're not seeking it out in these ways. But even if you are, that's that is a good solution, but it might not always be practical when the child is continuing to do this over and over again. He's clearly getting some kind of emotional need fulfilled by getting that reaction out of us and out of his friends.
Yeah, what that does, Gary, is it speaks back to the emotional reactivity. So when the child does it, and laughs, and the parent does something and the child laughs harder, what you're getting is a child over the threshold. So then at that point, what I'm thinking is not the activity. I'm thinking this child is dysregulating, and my job is to help this child calm down. So my focus is not going to be specifically on this throwing car interaction. It's going to be, what can I do to help this child to calm down? And I may have to, take the child out of the situation. I may have to put my arm on the child's back and start rubbing the child's back. But that's the co-regulation that you were talking about. For the child to be silly and activated and throwing cars means that I have to be really low-keyed to bring that child down.
Without saying, calm down, calm down.
I tell the story all the time, and I don't remember if I told it on the video. I had this little 6-year-old boy, and he came in distressed, really distressed in the office, and he says, Dr. G, I come home, and my mom says, calm down. Will you calm down? You have to calm down. And then my daddy comes home from work, and he says, would you calm down? You have to calm down. What's calm mean?
Yeah.
So unless you have the visceral, the body experience of calm, you can talk to a child about calming down till you're blue in the face, and the child's not going to know what it is. So that really speaks to the need for early therapies to begin to work on the body, to begin to work on sensations, to put the sensations together, to give feeling names, to begin to do things that get the child to focus on his or her body and where the distress is. And it's much more primary than a verbal interaction that may be going zoom over the child's head.
And that's where a good occupational therapist comes in so handy to see all of the pieces there. Just a couple of things about that. I noticed that, it's so clear that the child is not yet developmentally in a place to control their behavior when they do things like our son does. You can hear that, he's been told, we don't hit friends, we don't kick friends, or whatever. And as he's doing the hitting or kicking, he's saying out loud, we don't kick friends, we don't. So he's repeating the script that he hears. We don't lick, we don't, and he's saying it, but he's still doing it, and he's still motivated to do it, and he's not able to control not doing.
Yeah, and what it's like, one of the expressions that I use with parents is it's like trying to stop the water flowing over Niagara Falls with a branch. That what's happening is the emotional system is so activated that, the child can repeat those words, don't do this, don't do that, but the emotional system is overriding it, and the child can't stop himself or herself from doing it in that moment. It's just not possible.
Right, and using water is a good example. It's summertime, we're at splash pads, our son can't get enough of running through the water, but he always wants to go up and splash all the strangers, and oftentimes they're very little toddlers that he towers over because he's now 8. And, I feel like, oh man, here I am saying, oh, sweetie, don't do that. Oh, sweetie. And then he keeps running. We don't splash kids. We don't splash kids. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to have to get in there and entice him in some other game in order to stop it. But it's so exhausting.
I mean, that part of it is so critical that it's exhausting. But, what I wonder there is about two things. One is that as parents or teachers, we tend to catch the signals at a high level rather than the subtle signals, so that if we begin to pay attention to the subtle signals, we can catch it before it becomes activated. The other thing is, the need in some situations to remove the child from the activity, but without the punishment aspect, because lots of times what will happen is when the kids are, exhibiting the out of control or inappropriate behavior, the adult moves in with, something negative, punitive, maybe not wanting to do it that way, but it's acted out that way. Versus, I have to take the child out of the situation. This isn't a healthy situation, but my child can't help it. So I'm not going to punish my child. I'm just going to take my child out of the situation and help my child to calm down.
So as opposed to saying, we said don't splash kids, you splashed kids, we have to go now, I might say, and I did this the other day, I want to come back. I said, oh, but sweetie, Dad is home. He's waiting for us. We're late for dinner. So make it about the dinner instead. And he still said, I want to come back. I said, okay, well, we'll come back. We'll come back again, maybe tomorrow. Exactly. So just making it not about what he was doing and punishing him or making him feel shame for something that he can't control.
Exactly. Yeah. The child is giving the signal, this can't work. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the signal and help the child and support the child, and scaffold the child, but I don't have to punish the child for something that he or she just can't control in the moment.
Right. This brings me to a controversial topic that you may or may not have a strong opinion about. But you've talked a lot today about physiology and emotionality that's ruled by biological systems in the child. And some people might be thinking, well, if it's a body problem, then there can be drugs to solve that problem. And if my child is upregulated so much all the time, maybe I can get a drug to calm my child down. And I know there are many opinions on all sides of that, and I was just curious what the DIR take on that would be.
It's probably as controversial in DIR as any place else. What I think in a lot of situations, there are two situations that I think about. One is where a child is unable to stop themselves from putting themselves in dangerous situations. And with kids that I see with severe mood disorders, and I had gotten into this discussion with Dr. Greenspan a number of years ago, when you're dealing with something that is so unsafe that there really isn't time to explore, medication can be really necessary and helpful, and if it's done the right way. But the second thing that I was going to say is with so many of the families that I see, they really haven't had the therapeutic experience to sort of explore. And so what I would want to do is I would want to get to know this family, get to know the child, spend time with the child, and, certainly try lots of other things before moving into medication. One of the things, Daria, that I talk to parents about is, and this information comes from my work in a bipolar network. I see a lot of kids who have been referred for possible bipolar disorder. So you're dealing with a lethal kind of disorder. And what I have to say to parents is, medication may be a pearl of a recommendation, but the younger the child, the lower the probability of the medication helping. Medication helps young children probably about 40% of the time from what the statistics show. So regardless of what we do, we have to come up with interventions, recognizing that medication may not work anyway. So it's not just that we're going to give the child medication and that's going to solve everything. It may work, it may not work, it may work a little. We have to do a lot of work in coming up with interventions that, in addition to medication interventions, I think.
And support the child's body and their needs, their sensory needs. If it's a child who needs to move around a lot and they're on medication and just sitting on an iPad all day, well, they're still going to have that need in their body to move around a lot.
Yeah, but that's an excellent, that's an excellent point. That, when you think about individual differences, there are kids that need movement. And so these are kids who need to move around the room. And what I think is necessary is to train, professionals to use those kinds of behaviors rather than put the brakes on them. So I had a boy who was driving everybody nuts with his activity in the classroom. And the principal was really reluctant to go along with this. And I knew that this kid was not a runner, so he wasn't going to run out of the school. And I was able to talk to the principal about allowing this child to leave the room when he began to feel that feeling. And he would run to the gym by himself. And he would run laps in the gym, and then he would come back to the room, and he would sit down, and he would be fine. And we didn't have to call the school psychologist, and he didn't have to be sent home from school, for bad behavior. It was, here's a child who needs movement. We know that the child is going to be safe because it's not a risky child. It's a movement child. Let's find a place where this child can move and be safe. Never had one incident where people would have to go after him. He just went back to the room, he sat down, and he did his work.
And that's probably part of the scary part, is that the teachers don't know that in advance, so they're scared to give that freedom, and also they're worried about other kids wanting to have the same privilege, and
How can we do it to him if the other kids are going to ask to do it? Well, all of us need to be treated based on who we are and our needs. Just because one child has this, strategy, it doesn't mean we're going to give the strategy to everybody else. That's the way it is, yeah.
Right. I remember, in the 70s being in grade 3 or something, and a little girl in my class had diabetes, and she was allowed to get up and go to the fountain to drink water whenever she wanted. And she would just go, and then she'd come back, and maybe sometimes she did it for fun, and maybe sometimes she did it because she needed it, but it was understood that that was her special need that she had to have, and it was fine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, I thought it would be nice maybe to go over an example or a little bit more in depth about what we mean with co-regulation, because I think that is a big struggle for parents. This co-regulation piece, if their child is doing something that they don't want their child to do, that is inappropriate, acting out, having a tantrum, whatever it is, can you go through some of the steps? And
yeah, well, I don't know if I can go through all the steps, but the first thing I think is the principle of this is a we. not a him or a her and his or her behavior. This is a we, and we are a system. And in this system, we each affect each other. And, it's the same as any other, moving system. We're in it together. Something that I do is going to affect you, and you're going to respond to it, and it's going to affect me, and I'm going to respond to it, and it's going to affect you. And one of the analogies that I use to really help parents with the co-regulation piece is to talk about playing ping pong. So number one, in order to play the ping pong, you're on one side of the table and I'm on the other side of the table, and we're a system. And when I serve the ball, I don't have a clue what you're going to do with it, but I can't do anything. I have to wait for your response. You can hit it hard, you can hit it soft, you can slice it, you can do anything. But you're going to bring it back to me. The ball's going to be on my side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something to get it to your side. If this ping pong game is too fast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use strategies to slow it down. So what I want to do is I want to have a communication, an interaction, where there's an in sync, contingent, back and forth interaction that is at a level that's comfortable for both of us. You're not excited, I'm not excited. I'm not feeling like I want to take a nap, you're not feeling like you want to take a nap. And so what I'm doing is I'm monitoring you and you're monitoring me, and we're realizing that everything that you do affects me and everything I do affects you. And so that's the co-regulated. We want to have a smooth interaction rather than a racing interaction or boring interaction. And the only way that I can do that is by monitoring you and you monitoring me. So I think I hope that's helpful in co-regulation.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you. Other people describe it as a dance, and it's very similar to what you were just describing, and you mentioned a dance earlier as well in talking about it. One last question. What do you do with a family where one parent is totally on board with this approach and the other parent won't give up the behavioral approach?
Yeah.
And insists on, I need to teach him a lesson. I need to make him learn.
Yeah. Well, what I tend to do in my practice when I see that is I may have an idea about the intervention, but I have to take a step back, and I would want to have more time with that parent to explore where that person got the idea from. I had one, it wasn't a pleasant situation, but it was a situation very much like you're talking about, where a father, when the child used curse words, would wash the child's mouth out with soap. And he was sure that this is the way to do it, and mother just really was against it, but she couldn't do anything about it. And I saw the father, and the father talked to me about, I can't stand when my child says these words, and I'm going to wash his mouth out with soap. And I looked at the father and I said, I'm just curious, where did you get the idea of, washing your son's mouth out with soap rather than anything else? And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, when I was a kid and I said a bad word, my father washed my mouth out with soap. I never realized that I would do the same thing as my father. And so it was a brief kind of taking the time to explore with that parent rather than to have a preconceived way. I'm going to see your child every week and we'll figure this out. No, what I have to do is I have to change my approach and I have to figure out what's the resistance to, doing it a different way. And so there have been times where child therapies for me have become adult therapies. It just makes more sense to see the parent and work with the parent. And I would do something like that.
Great. Well, thank you for all of this rich information.
It's helpful.
I'm sure it'll be very, very helpful. And we'll put the podcast up and I'll put links to your Facebook post and summarize some of the great points that you made and tips for parents and practitioners out there. And thank you so much for being on Affect Autism, Dr. Glovinsky.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was just fun talking to you, Daria.
You too. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone, like and subscribe, sign up for the newsletter at affectautism.com, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Find out more at affectautism.com.